In this video, I'd like to talk about time and our relationship to time and what it means to be eternally present. There's a lot spoken about in regard to living in the now or being present. So what is the eternal present? What is the now, and how does one live there in one's daily life, if indeed that's even possible? I'm going to read from a chapter from my first book, No Path to Enlightenment, called Time, starting with a couple of quotes. "What then is time? If no one asks me, then I know what it is. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know." St. Augustine. The intuitive recognition of the instant, thus reality, is the highest act of wisdom. D.T. Suzuki. You could argue that one of the biggest constraining factors and stresses in our lives is our relationship with time. Specifically, the idea that we have a finite amount of it and must therefore make the most of the time we've been given, or indeed the time we have left. So, what exactly is time? We may think of it in many ways as the ticking clock, the aging process, the changing seasons, as an arrow flying in one direction, charting our life stories from birth to death, moving relentlessly into the future and leaving the past in its wake. Time seems as real as the air we breathe, inextricably linked to our lives. It is a dependable touchstone, constantly referenced and measured against, often passing so quickly we are chasing it, and sometimes so slow we become bored with time on our hands. But what exactly is the intrinsic nature of time? As the quote from St. Augustine succinctly expresses, time seems to be such an obvious commodity until we attempt to describe it. So what is time in and of itself? Events appear to occur in time, but does time exist independent of the events happening within it? In other words, if there were no events and nothing changed, thus leaving nothing to measure, would time exist? Equally, could it exist if there was nothing observing its passage? Without sentient beings to conceptualize time, can it have any meaning whatsoever? Do we exist within an objective phenomena called time, carried along on the crest of an ever-present now that flows from the past into the future? Or is time a construct of the human mind? We measure the passage of time in hours, minutes and seconds, and in days, weeks, months and years. Our clocks measure small timescales and our calendars larger ones. But what exactly are we measuring? Perhaps we are simply quantifying change. Does the concept of time have any meaning without it? We watch a candle burn and we understand change by comparing its present form to its previous, and then can decide its future form. Those changes, we say, take time. Our experience shows that the candle changes in one direction. It continues burning down until it is extinguished. Similarly, we believe our lives are burning down in one direction. However, another way of perceiving is that there is only ever the present moment being experienced, the luminosity of the naked flame. And both the past and the future are defined by this present moment. The concept of change and its measurement are completely dependent upon the present moment. In that sense, the future and the past are only experienced in the present. So perhaps understanding the present is the key to understanding time. In terms of time then, what exactly is the present moment? Can we measure it? Does it have a duration? Does it exist for a second, half a second, or 1/100th of a second? Is it possible to measure it in time? Or is it a fleeting, temporal perception that has only meaning when experienced through a sentient being? If the present moment can only be comprehended in terms of a subjective conscious awareness and cannot be objectively measured, then can it actually exist within a time frame? Furthermore, how can we isolate the present from the immediate future and from the immediate past when it seems indistinguishable from both? At what point does the present moment become the immediate past, and at what point does the immediate future become the present moment? It would appear that the demarcation between the present and the past, and between the present and the future, is impossible to define. We do not seem to be able to draw a line in the sand, so to speak, prior to which is the past and after which is the future. So all we appear to be left with is that subjective temporal experience out of which we create a before and after, a past and future. If the present cannot be measured in time, then perhaps it is timeless. The suggestion that time is subjective and therefore relative to the observer is borne out by physics, which has established that time has no independent objective reality. It does not exist as a universal constant, but is always relative to the observer. In 1902, a technical assistant in a Swiss patent office began a series of thought experiments that would lead to the now famous special theory of relativity, later to be reworked as his general theory of relativity. Albert Einstein ushered in the 20th century with two assumptions. Firstly, his principle of relativity, stating that all motion is relative to other observable objects, and that there is no such thing as absolute rest. And secondly, the speed of light is constant, having the same value c with respect to any observer, either at rest or moving uniformly. This led to the mind-bending conclusion that in order for all observers to measure the same value for the speed of light, time would have to flow differently for different observers. Einstein showed that time and space were relative, and the passage of time was dependent upon the speed of the observer. So the faster one travelled, the slower time passed in relation to someone who was stationary. In short, moving clocks ticked at a slower rate. However, in our everyday life, because we are all moving at roughly the same speed, all measurements of time are virtually identical. Virtually. Most speeds are far too slow to produce observable differences, but small variations have been measured at higher speeds. The Haffel and Keating experiment in 1971 placed atomic clocks upon commercial jets and flew them twice around the world, and then compared the clocks against others on the ground. The results did show differences in time, but they were measured not in minutes or even seconds, but nanoseconds, a thousandth millionth of a second. To give an idea of how small these differences are, 1 nanosecond is to 1 second, what 1 second is to 30 years. The speeds necessary to produce differences measured in days, months, or years are far greater than any speeds we can travel using current technology, and such velocities would need to be approaching the speed of light at 186,000 miles per second to show such differences. Again, to put that in context, an object travelling at such a speed would circle the Earth's equator 7 times per second. Although we cannot travel anywhere near such speeds, physicists are able to study particle collisions that routinely reach 99.9% the speed of light using massive machines called particle accelerators. These are electrified, hollow evacuated tubes through which charged particles are accelerated. From an external observer's viewpoint, the inner clock of such a travelling particle runs much slower than a particle at rest, by a factor that is in precise agreement with special relativity. However, back in our everyday world, where such immense speeds play no part, time passes at the same rate for everyone. Of course, subjectively speaking, we experience big psychological variations depending upon our situation. So, for instance, 5 minutes spent reading a captivating novel appears to go far quicker than 5 minutes waiting on hold during a stressful phone call. Superficially at least, the rate at which time subjectively passes seems to depend upon our level of engagement and enjoyment in the moment. Relativistic, philosophical and psychological contemplations aside, there is no escaping the fact that on a practical level, the functioning of our society is dependent upon a shared understanding and measurement of time. It was during the mid-1800s that the railways of Great Britain adopted Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, as a standard time across the island. Then soon after, the United States and Canadian railroads set standard time zones across the continent. Prior to such standardization, time had been a local matter for each individual town or city. One can only imagine the problems created for those travelling great distances. In today's world, we accept a standard time as a fact of life, giving little thought to its arbitrary and contrived history. All daily routines are run against this standard, which controls virtually all areas of our life, and on a larger scale, there is a timeline upon which we measure progress through life. We believe we are on a one-way journey travelling from birth to death. Our current location on this timeline is identified by the number of years since birth, but as mentioned, there is also an ever-present subjective position in time, the conscious awareness of the present moment, now. Practically speaking, this is defined by measuring against standard time. For example, it is now 2:05 p.m. on a Monday afternoon. This practical description of now can provide useful information, such as there are 55 minutes until my next client. But in a wider context, it is a reference point that draws upon a vast personal history and sets up short-term plans and long-term goals. And of course, plans and goals are a reminder of the limited time we apparently have in this world. If there is any doubt that time's arrow flows in one direction, we only need to look in the mirror and witness the aging process. We are growing older, not younger. Such change is methodically measured by clocks ticking off seconds, minutes and hours, and by calendars relentlessly turning over days, weeks, months and years. Removed from society's artificial demarcations, nature appears to have its own cycles, as evidenced by the changing seasons and the sun's daily arc across the sky. For prehistoric man, these celestial observations and the changing seasons informed nomadic movements, farming rotations, and marked sacred festivals. In these early eras, there were certainly predictable events, but time was not a fixed digital regulator imposed upon life. Rather, it was a two-way analog interaction with nature. In today's digital age, agreeing upon a shared standard time is necessary to regulate, organize and synchronize our modern lives. It is a vital part in maintaining social coherence and order. But in the move from analog to digital, perhaps we have lost something in translation. Within the context of our modern era, time is essentially a social convenience. But what of its intrinsic nature, its objective qualities, and the apparent transience of the present moment? Perhaps our relationship to the present moment can unlock the riddle of time. Could it be that time is only meaningful to the human mind? That time is a concept relying upon the conscious awareness of change, and that outside of the conditioned mind it is meaningless? Your true nature lives within the eternal present, and the eternal present within it. Out of this unchanging eternal source, the illusionary self spins out a past and projects a future, a before and after, creating time through subjective experience. The conscious experience of time is part of the illusion of being a finite, limited form. Once freed from that illusion, it becomes apparent that we are not moving through time from the past into the future, and time does not flow, nor are we carried within it, but that we are only ever in the eternal present moment. However, our subjective experience suggests otherwise. Our minds are conditioned to think linearly and sequentially, and so rather than being in the eternal present, we feel more like passengers on a train, travelling from the past into the future, the stations along the way serving as markers on our journey. Our departure from the last station is given a time in the past, and arrival at the next is given a time in the future. The distances between stations are measured in various ways: days, weeks, months, years, and decades. The stations are sometimes milestone events such as birthdays, anniversaries, religious festivals, or the passing of loved ones, but are often as mundane as last Tuesday or tomorrow afternoon. However, as mentioned, there is a fixed and immovable source existing beneath the subjective experience of the present moment, and therefore in all the past and future stations of our lives. That source, your true nature, is the track upon which the train is travelling. The track is the absolute, an immovable, unchanging, constant, holding every present moment and all past and future ones. It has no departure or arrival, no before or after, no past or future, because it is the departure and the arrival, the before and the after, the past and the future. It does not redefine our understanding of time, instead it negates it, because if all the stations are one, there can be no movement between them, and with no movement there is no time. At a deeper level of consciousness, we are not passengers on a train moving through time from the past into the future. We are the unmoved eternal absolute, the track that holds all. The track lying at the station of your birth is the same track that lies at the station of your first day at school, which is the same track that lies at the station of your 18th birthday, and is the track beneath your feet as you watch this video now. The same track lies under all our history, right up to this present moment, and extends to every so-called future event. This track is the present moment, the only place we can ever be. Unmoved and untouched by the apparent rush of life's train and all the subjective experiences therein, the Absolute quietly sits, the ground of all being, joining all pasts and all futures, holding the entire cacophony of life within the eternal present. The illusionary self cannot survive in the present moment. It lives in a story of past and future, carrying the dead weight of a fixed past and projecting that solidified rock into an imaginary future. Once the illusionary self and its limiting story is exposed, life bursts forth and every moment is lived in the freedom of present awareness. You become fully awake in every action, where nothing you do is a means to an end. You are no longer the story of the burning candle. You become the luminosity of the naked flame. As a child, building sandcastles on the beach or riding your bicycle, you lived in the eternal present effortlessly. As a manifestation of the Absolute, you taste the beauty and simplicity of life once more. You return to your true nature, building sandcastles, filling your bucket with wet sand. You are fully present in the action, your senses filled with the salty sea air, the sound of seagulls and the waves breaking on the shore as the sun warms you to the core. And this presence can be experienced anywhere. You don't need idyllic conditions such as a magnificent sunset or a walk in nature or a sandy beach. It is always available. It can be experienced while washing your hands or waiting in line at the checkout or walking down a busy high street. Just like a child building sandcastles on the beach, everything you do lives in the eternal present. The action and the awareness become one, as doing and being merge into timeless presence.